G'day! In today's video I'm doing a review on the HP Victus. This one has got the model number G3PQ. It's got a Ryzen 5 5600H, 8GB of RAM which has been upgraded to 16, a 500GB NVMe SSD, an RX6500M 4GB model, and a 1080p 60Hz display. I've owned the laptop for around about a month now. I've used it for work purposes, video gaming, just general web browsing, and I've also brought it with me to and from work for that duration of time as well. So let's get into it and check out my thoughts on the HP Victus. Let's begin with the I/O. So we have a fairly standard attire, HDMI, USB, Ethernet, Type-C, doesn't support Thunderbolt. And looking around the back of it, we just mainly have this stylized almost aeroplane or Alienware-like grille on the back of the laptop. There is also the air vents on the back of it for the CPU fan and the GPU fan. And on the left-hand side, we have the full-size SD card slot. We have a headphone jack, USB-A, and the AC adapter port. I find the overall material of it just to be a hard plastic, which isn't too bad. It does pick up smudges relatively easily. But because it's plastic, it's relatively lightweight and should be pretty durable. I do have concern of the hinges though. As you can see, the amount of bounce that they've got there. Granted, this isn't really an issue as you mostly open it up and leave it, but if you are using it on a train or something, it might be annoying. And on the back we have a reflective V and also a satin finish to the plastic. Overall, it's pretty inoffensive. The display itself, I don't really have any pros or cons with it. It's perfectly fine. Granted, I haven't used that in an outside environment or a well naturally lit environment, but for me the brightness has been just fine. It is an IPS level panel, so you don't get really any inverting of the colors when you twist it. It is only running at 60 Hz as well, which I think may attribute to the better battery life that this machine does get. And here's the webcam. I find that the quality itself's not that great. I am in a relatively naturally lit room at the moment. Your results may vary depending on your room, but I'm assuming if the lights were off and there was a single light above me, it might be slightly better. But right now, it is not that great. As much as I didn't like the webcam, I did like the keyboard. The key travel was great. The spacing was perfectly fine. I had no issues whatsoever with it. To tell a lie, I did have one issue with it. It wasn't with the keys themselves, it was with the backlight. It only had a single level of brightness. It was either on or off, which is a tad disappointing. The trackpad I had no issues at all with. It was big, chunky, it responded well to touch, and gesturing was perfectly fine with it. Opening it up and looking inside, we have two fans in there and two copper pipes. I found since it's a relatively low wattage system, these fans do not get loud at all. Especially if you're web browsing, they barely kick up at all then. Even during gaming, they're very quiet. Sadly, upgradability here is very limited. We have two RAM slots, or two SODIMM slots, and we only have a single NVMe with previous space for another one, which they never put the connector on for. That's a tad disappointing, HP. And have a look at the charger. We have a 150 watt charger included, a HP branded one. I found battery life on this machine to be very good compared to an Intel equivalent machine. The Intel 10th and 11th gen normally last a couple of hours. This particular HP I had last around about just shy of 6 hours on a YouTube video benchmark. So overall I'm very happy with the battery life on this machine. And overall, what's my thoughts on gaming performance? So right now I'm going to load up Fall Guys and have a bit of a play with that. But I have tried out Cyberpunk, Counter-Strike, Battlefield 5, Fortnite, all of which play reasonably well as long as you're happy to turn down the graphics settings. I do find that once you've turned down the graphics settings, even the fan noise of the machine's considerably quieter compared to something like an Acer Nitro 5 or even a few of the MSI models. I do find that the Ryzen 5 5600H definitely helps with battery life and thermals. Especially this has got the AMD Smart Swift or Switch, where it can distribute the power between the CPU and the GPU, depending where the computer's demanding it the most. So I find because of that as well, even though it's mostly dealing around 50 watts of power between them, it usually gets relatively good gaming performance out of it. Granted, it does not have any H.264, H.265 video encoders embedded in there. The GPU does not have that at all. That was stripped out on this one. So if you want to do any form of streaming, it's going to be not as good for that. I wouldn't recommend it for it. But if you're after a cheap machine to carry to and from school and uni while being able to play some games, this one would probably tick the box, especially due to that battery life lasting around 6 hours on YouTube using Wi-Fi. So overall, I've been pretty darn impressed with it, considering it's not as powerful as what I would normally want. I find the machine to be nicely balanced. The 60Hz display it pushes the 6500M, but if it had a 120Hz display with that RDNA 2 chip, it would be underperforming for what the screen could accept. So you'd have to be constantly turning down resolutions, turning down graphic settings to match it, to get it to run smoothly. I find that the 60Hz display also complements the battery, so you get decent battery life out of it as well. The CPU, the Ryzen 5600H, is a relatively low power usage processor, so that also matches up quite well there too. I am disappointed that the keyboard itself doesn't have multiple levels of brightness or dimming, but that is perfectly fine for the price range that this laptop is sitting. So overall, I've been pretty happy with how balanced this is, and it's easily something I could recommend for a school computer. So in closing, I find the HP Victus to be a jack of all trades, master of none, but in this way it's a positive thing for this particular machine.